Ever feel like your brain is working against you?
Totally. Like you're battling your own brain, just trying to focus.
Yeah. Trying to resist those tempting distractions, but you're struggling to get motivated for the things you actually want to do.
It's the worst.
It is. But guess what? We're diving into that today.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
We're tackling dopamine.
Dopamine, always a fun one.
It is, but we're looking at it from a totally new perspective today, exploring how to make dopamine work for us, instead of against us.
Okay, yeah. Because that whole dopamine detox thing, it's everywhere you look these days. Right?
Everywhere. So we're doing a deep dive into this video by Dr. K.
Oh, yeah, I've seen his stuff. He's on that HealthyGamerGG channel.
That's the one. And he makes a pretty compelling argument against dopamine detox.
Really? See, I was thinking detoxes were the way to go. What's he saying?
Well, he says instead of suppressing dopamine, we need to make sure we've got enough of it. But here's the catch.
There's always a catch.
Isn't there always? He says we need to make sure we have enough dopamine available for the activities we want to be rewarding, even if they don't give us that instant hit of gratification.
Okay, so instead of a full detox, it's more like we're training our dopamine response. Like it's some kind of brain workout.
That's a great way to put it. Dopamine strength training.
I like it.
Right. It's about building up our capacity to find joy and motivation in the things that might take more effort, things that offer those delayed rewards.
It's like having enough fuel in the tank for the long haul, not just a quick burst of energy that leaves you drained afterward.
Exactly. Which makes you wonder, where did this whole detox idea come from in the first place?
Well, I think it's understandable why people gravitate toward it. We're constantly bombarded with this information about how overstimulation from technology and instant gratification are totally messing with our brains.
And it's not like that's totally wrong.
Right. It's true that constantly chasing those quick dopamine hits, like endlessly scrolling through social media or binging sugary snacks, can totally leave us feeling depleted and less motivated for the things that actually matter.
It's like that feeling when you finally want to get started on a passion project or you're trying to stick with a workout routine, but you just can't.
Exactly. And Dr. K gets into the neuroscience behind it, explaining how every time we do anything, our brains release dopamine.
So it's the dopamine that creates that feeling of pleasure.
Yeah. And then that feeling basically tells our brain, do that again. It reinforces the behavior.
Okay, that makes sense. So then if we're constantly flooding our system with those quick dopamine fixes, we're left with less of it for things that require, like, sustained effort.
Precisely. Those quick hits basically deplete our reserves.
So what can we do? How do we start to shift that balance and get those reserves back?
Well, Dr. K suggests maximizing our dopamine reserves, and he has this really interesting idea about how to do it. He calls it the morning advantage.
The morning advantage. Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more.
It's actually pretty straightforward. He suggests we start our day with low dopamine activities. In other words, resist that urge to grab your phone first thing in the morning.
Oh, man. That's way easier said than done, though, right?
It definitely takes practice.
But it does make sense if you think about willpower being a limited resource. If we use it all up scrolling before we even have coffee, it's no wonder we're struggling later in the day.
Exactly. We only have so much willpower to work with each day.
So being mindful of those dopamine reserves, especially early on, is key. But Dr. K, it doesn't just stop at willpower.
Oh, no, he goes way deeper than that.
He talks about different parts of our brain influencing our dopamine response. Like he starts with the amygdala. Doesn't that have something to do with emotions?
It does. The amygdala is basically the emotional center of our brain.
And if I remember correctly, it plays a huge role in our stress response.
You got it. It's all about the stress response. And what Dr. K points out is that the more negative emotions we're carrying around, stress, anxiety, sadness, all that, the more vulnerable we are to those quick dopamine fixes. Our brains just look for relief from all those feelings.
So it's almost like our brain is looking for an escape.
Exactly.
And that's when we give in to those impulses. So it's not really about willpower. It's more about addressing those root causes.
Absolutely. And Dr. K emphasizes how important it is to process difficult emotions through therapy, journaling, or even just going for a walk.
Anything to help regulate our emotions and avoid seeking those dopamine hits in the first place.
Exactly.
So we talked about the amygdala, the emotional center, but what about the prefrontal cortex? Isn't that the part of our brain that makes decisions?
That's the one. The prefrontal cortex is where things get really interesting. It's essentially the CEO of the brain, right? Making decisions, planning things out. But here's the thing. We can actually influence how it sees an activity's value.
Wait, so you're telling me we can actually hack our brain's reward system, like rewire it to crave the things we want to be doing.
Well, it's not exactly rewiring, but it's more like we're learning to work with our brains instead of against them.
Okay, I like the sound of that. But how does it actually work?
So think about it this way. Our brains are constantly making these little calculations, right? Like, is scrolling through social media more valuable right now, or is it tackling that work project?
And those calculations are basically driven by which one will give us that faster dopamine hit.
Exactly. And usually our brain goes for the quick win, the instant gratification.
Even when we know it's not what we should be doing, we've all been there.
Oh, absolutely. But here's where it gets interesting. Dr. K talks about this exercise he calls play the tape through. Basically, you consciously think about the consequences of your choices, like really playing them out in your mind.
So instead of telling myself, I'll get to that later, which we both know I probably won't, I force myself to acknowledge the reality of procrastination.
You got it. You confront those feelings of overwhelm when you have a million things due, or that disappointment when you haven't made time for your goals.
It's like when you know you shouldn't have that extra slice of cake, but then you picture yourself later that night regretting it. Suddenly, skipping it seems way more appealing.
Exactly. It's about bringing those future consequences into the present moment, which helps your brain make a different calculation.
So we can actually trick our brain into choosing the thing that's better for us in the long run.
It's not really a trick, more like strategic thinking, but we're only scratching the surface here. Remember the hippocampus?
Hippocampus. We haven't even gotten to that yet.
Well, get ready, because this part is especially relevant for our listeners who are all about trying new things. You know, the novelty seekers.
Hit me with it. Tell me everything.
The hippocampus is that part of the brain that handles memory and learning. But here's the thing. It also happens to be super sensitive to new experiences, like really sensitive.
Yeah, so my brain on new experiences, what's happening there?
Basically, when we encounter something novel, our hippocampus lights up like a Christmas tree. And when that happens, we get this surge of dopamine, which is why starting a new hobby or checking out a new place can feel so incredibly exciting and motivating.
So that's why I feel like $1,000,000 when I try a new workout class instead of my usual routine. Makes so much sense.
Bingo! Your brain is basically giving you a big thumbs up for stepping outside of your comfort zone.
I love getting my brain a little gift like that, but I'm guessing there's a practical application here.
You know it. Dr. K suggests that if you're struggling to stick with a healthy habit, maybe because it's become a little too routine, adding a bit of novelty can make all the difference.
So instead of forcing myself to go to the same gym every day, I could try a new workout video, find a different running route, maybe even switch up my workout buddy.
There you go. You're getting it. It's
Yeah.
like hitting the refresh button on your brain's reward system.
Love it. And just like that, I'm excited to work out again.
That's the power of novelty. But Dr. K doesn't stop there. He brings another fascinating player into the game, our opioid system.
Wait, hold up. Opioids. Are we talking about the same opioids I'm thinking of?
We are, but it's a bit more complex than it might sound. Our brains actually produce their own opioids naturally.
Really? And what do those do?
Well, these natural opioids, they influence how we experience both pleasure and pain.
Okay, that's interesting. But how does it all connect to dopamine and motivation?
Well, get this. Pain and pleasure are actually super interconnected. Dr. K explains that sometimes experiencing a little bit of pain, like the discomfort of pushing yourself during a workout, can actually increase the pleasure we feel afterward.
So that runner's high after a tough run, or that sense of accomplishment after finishing a challenging project, even if it meant some late nights.
Exactly. Those are perfect examples.
So it's like our brains are saying, hey, that was tough, but you did it. Here's a celebratory cocktail of dopamine and opioids to make sure you remember how awesome this feels.
You nailed it. And Dr. K says that this understanding can be incredibly useful in our everyday lives. He uses the example of exercise. If we always stay in our comfort zone, we might not be tapping into that full reward response.
So instead of doing a few reps that feel easy, I need to push myself a little further to a point where it's challenging, but not like torture.
Exactly. Dr. K calls it finding the sweet spot of pain and pleasure.
The sweet spot of pain and pleasure. I love it. This is all so fascinating.
It really is.
It's like we've been given this incredibly complex, powerful machine, our brain, but nobody ever gave us the user manual.
And instead of trying to figure out how it works, we try to force it to do what we want, which usually just leads to frustration.
Which is why Dr. K's approach is so refreshing. It's not about deprivation or willpower. It's about understanding our neurobiology and working with it. It's about using our understanding of dopamine, the power of novelty, and even our brain's response to challenge to create positive change.
And the best part is, these are all tools we have access to right now. By learning to use them effectively, we can unlock a whole new level of motivation and fulfillment.
So are you saying that understanding how our brain works could be the ultimate life hack?
I'm saying it's definitely a step in the right direction.
It's like we've been driving this high-performance car without knowing it had all these hidden features we could be using this whole time.
Right. And imagine what we could accomplish if we actually took the time to learn how to use them all. And this deep dive, it's focused on dopamine, but that's just one piece of the puzzle.
Oh yeah, there's so much more to uncover.
Right. Think about all the other amazing things our brains are capable of. Our emotions, habits, even how we experience things like pain. It's all connected to this incredible system we're only just beginning to understand.
It's true. And it reminds me, at the end of his video, Dr. K leaves us with a really interesting question. He asks, what if understanding our neurobiology is the ultimate life hack?
Ooh, that is a good one. A total brain teaser. What if, instead of relying on willpower or the latest self-help trend, we could tap into the power of our own brains to create lasting change?
Right. We spend so long treating our brains like these mysterious black boxes.
Mm,
But the more we learn about them, the more we realize that we actually have a say in how they work.
exactly. It's about shifting our perspective. Instead of feeling like we're at the mercy of our brains, what if we approached it from a place of empowerment?
So we can use this knowledge to make conscious choices that are aligned with our goals.
Exactly. Choices that help us live more fulfilling and meaningful lives. And that's something I think we can all get behind.
I'm with you on that one. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into dopamine. Listener, are you ready to unlock the incredible potential of your own neurobiology? There's a whole universe waiting to be discovered inside your own head.